what I'm seeing, I think, from everybody who's building anything related to, Bitcoin or social or anything, it's almost like, I think Nostr is such a reframing of the, kind of reshuffles the chessboard in a sense. And so everything should be rethought, and it's a great time to be building and kind of rethinking from like what, with this new set of Legos, what can we now do? So we got connected on Twitter. You reached out and mentioned some of the stuff you're working on and some of the stuff you're thinking about. And I don't have a ton of context outside of what I've read about bookmark.org, and I see you were at Google and Apple before. So I wonder if you could just sort of start with a little bit of intro of kind of like what you're all about and what you're, kind of what you're excited about these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out sort of very early on the very early web as a teenager in the late 1990s, kind of teaching myself HTML and figuring out the really early days of the web, putting my websites on GeoCities and Tripod and all these early hosting services. And I remember the energy around that time, this fascination with this new world, and everyone's on and we can all express ourselves and publish. And it was just this really, really exciting moment. And so, fast forward my career, a variety of startups, worked as an engineer, and then more recently was able to get in and work at Google for about 4 years, Apple for 2 years, and that was really eye-opening. But during that experience, I was always feeling like, the web is kind of ossifying. It's turning into this big kind of slow monster. And so then when I started learning about this world of Bitcoin, I saw some of that like excitement from the early days of the web, where it's like, hey, this is just like brand new and people barely even understand it. And it kind of barely works, but it works good enough that everyone can see like this is going to keep getting better and better.
Totally.
And so out of one corner of my eye, I kind of started, diving deeper and deeper into that world and starting to understand it. And then, so earlier this year, I left Apple and started kind of going full time, just researching and digging into this stuff and really fully embracing it. And so basically this past year has been a year of kind of exploration, of digging really deep into this stuff, and then participating a little bit in the open source world and things like that. And basically what I've seen now is like two different worlds, right? So there's a huge contrast between the big tech world that I came from and seeing like the scale there and how things operate there at such a large level, and then seeing kind of the grassroots Bitcoin and now Nostr ecosystems that are emerging. And so where my head is at is, okay, how do we bridge these worlds? Like how do we scale this up and coming stuff? And it likely will be the next decade, the next 2 decades that this is happening. But how is that going to play out? That's where I see kind of myself fitting into things, is like, let's make this stuff work. Let's make it mature. Let's make it actually available to consumers. Let's make it accessible to the mainstream. And there's a number of challenges that are going to be involved in that. There's a lot of challenges. And so, I'm really looking to hit those challenges head on in the future, because I think that that's where the whole kind of technology industry is moving.
Right. Yeah. And there's certainly like a lot of overlaps between, the people who, discovered and are active users of Bitcoin, and then the people who are early active users of Nostr. They're totally different technologies and can, in theory, there's no real need to overlap right now. But they tend to have some cultural, philosophical, overlap and underpinning. So I wonder, like, are you sort of more attracted to kind of, I'd say Bitcoin is further along. Are you more attracted to sort of that ecosystem? It's still very early, but it's got more than a decade of history already. Or do you feel like the stuff you're seeing in Nostr is what's really kind of grabbing your attention?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question, because what interests me specifically is actually the intersection between these two worlds. That's what I find fascinating. So yes, they do share, I think, a very similar cultural ethos. It's probably a lot of the same people on both networks at this point. But the thing that has really got my attention over the past year or so is the possibility of kind of creating a merger between money and media, so to speak, or a kind of a trustless way to exchange money and media.
Yep.
And this gets into a lot of things, but that development, I think, is like historically very significant and could potentially be transformative. I think it could completely change kind of the architecture of how media is distributed on the internet, and so that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, totally. And I think the intersection is going to be where a lot of the magic lies, but, in a sense, coupling them in a necessary way too early could also cause a little bit of the downfall of it. Like if you don't sort of have enough separation that you can sort of build each one properly and only make them intersect or touch where necessary and useful, instead of, a lot of, I think, in recent history, a lot of these kinds of ideas have gotten tried where they were kind of too coupled too early, and sort of, money is kind of one network, payments is another network, communication is another network, and there's obvious overlaps between money and payments, and there's less early necessity to have money and communication coupled, but there's obvious advantages to how kind of networks work and value transfer flows. So I wonder, if I think the intersection is going to be the most interesting part, but do you feel like there's an obvious intersection activity that you're excited to pursue right now, or do you think? Yeah.
So, I think with Nostr, if you look at the relays right now they're all volunteer, which is nice, but it's not scalable and it's not going to last forever with all volunteer relay operators.
Right.
So there needs to be an economic model for why are these relays hosting everyone's data and serving all this data over the internet. And so I think that's kind of the most obvious and the most pressing need for coming up with a solution to be able to kind of send value in one direction and send media back in the other direction.
Yeah. I think of the relays as a kind of an early interesting point where we know that there's bandwidth costs, we know there's storage costs, we know there's compute costs. And so it's nice that there's a volunteer ecosystem that's emerging, and hobbyists and people who want to contribute to the mission and play with the technology. But I totally agree that, when you have those real costs, you also, have to find some way to help people share value among the kind of otherwise uncoordinated ecosystem players. So I think of users, clients, and relays as kind of the ecosystem players that all want to coordinate, but in very loose affiliation. They're not going to exchange bank details. They need to sort of coordinate with each other without having bank details, even though there's real value and real costs that sort of end up getting sunk at the relay side. Go ahead. Yep.
No, I was going to say exactly. That's I think the biggest problem, because if it's not solved, then I don't think the network has any chance of scaling.
So we were talking about sort of the intersection between media and value, and sort of having a careful flow around that. And I wonder, have you played around? It's kind of a topic I've followed and been exploring for years and really excited about. There's one project that I got involved with called stacker.news, which was a very specific exploration of that hypothesis. I wonder if that's one that you've noticed or played with before.
Absolutely, yeah. I've definitely used stacker.news, and actually chatted a bit with Kian when we launched Bookmark. He joined our channel, and we had a little bit of a back and forth. So really excited about what they're doing at stacker.news. That's awesome. I think they kind of set the stage for this whole space. We're really one of the early pioneers in building a great product, and obviously a lot of users. And so, that's really excited about what they're doing. Yeah.
So I think it's right. They sort of pioneered some of the early, what does it feel like to have some value stored and the easy ability to dole it out? Because I think, everybody hears the word microtransactions and they're like, oh, that'll never work. People don't want that. The UX is horrible, et cetera. And I think people are imagining like visiting the New York Times and paying 25 cents to unblock a paywall. And I think that mental model will not work. But I think the thing that does work about stacker.news, and probably works at a large scale with Nostr, is that if you have value on hand for other reasons, you have wallets for other reasons, whether it's tipping or playing or whatever, when you click on a link and visit a place, you could imagine pretty easily paying that with a stacker.news like experience. Kind of, I don't know if you've seen the zapping notes on Nostr, which I think it's not actually a protocol level thing. It's really more of a application client level thing. But I think a bunch of clients are starting to. I think Snort.social has it out, and I saw JB55 tease it on Damus. So I think it's probably coming.
And is
soon.
that's a non-custodial? It's non-custodial, or how does that work?
So my understanding, my guess and my understanding of how it would work is that similar to the way, like I primarily use Damus as my kind of daily client, but I can configure any kind of Lightning address in my profile, and so I could choose as far as Damus is concerned, it's non-custodial, but I can choose a custodial or non-custodial, and I think I've used Moon and Wallet of Satoshi successfully in each of them. I'm actually not an expert on the details of the different wallets, but my understanding is people have some
Wallet of
concerns
Satoshi
around
is custodial. Moon, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it's like Moon is a weird one.
Yeah, I've heard some people have some concerns about it, but I just use it to play. I'm not actually doing anything serious with it. So, but yeah, I think those are good examples of how you can tie, like especially the zap concept is a really good example of how you can tie media and value transmission. So once we have that,
there's a distinction though. I just want to stop you there because there is a little bit of a distinction, right? So the idea of these zaps is a user is through their user interface kind of making a conscious decision, even if it's just a click or a gesture of some kind. They're consciously deciding, yes, I want to send this value from here to there. What I think where things might go is an even deeper kind of almost like protocol level integration where it's like my client is just requesting media resources and paying for them to be transferred to me without me consciously each time saying, yes, send 1 sat here and 2 sats over there and 3 sats over there, right? My client would take care of that for me, and I would just maintain a balance with the client, and the client would interact with all these different relays and figure out, to download this profile picture is going to cost me 1 sat, but this one I can get for free for whatever reason, right? So there would need to be some kind of mediation going on these media networks, but I see it happening not kind of consciously. Every user saying, that picture, here's 2 sats, right? You know what I mean? Yeah,
I hear that. I think I kind of see both happening, and maybe I'll just throw out the model that I have in my mind. Yeah. Okay. So I think the one where I'd say totally agree with the subterranean version of it is the interplay between a client and a relay. So, if we know that we agree that relays have real costs to operate them, and so they have to get paid, and presumably the client is going to be the portal through which the relay gets paid, right? Maybe I don't know, if I go on Damus and I top up some value and I pay Damus, I don't know, 100,000 sats a month just to operate the service, and they pass along 90,000 of those to the relay to pay for storage and bandwidth. I don't know the numbers, but if that's the case, then I've already got value topped up, and just as I use the network, I hit a post. I don't tell Damus, hey, pay this relay to host my post. They just kind of do it, and that's kind of the subterranean version I think that you're sort of mentioning, which I think is compelling and almost easy to agree. I would easily agree that that's the case. Yeah.
Well, that's one model. Another potential model is the users pay the relays directly. So the users say, okay, this is my relay, and I pay them, and then configure that relay in your client. So you tell your client, hey, this is my relay. So then you can use any client you want. You don't have to have funds on deposit with a client. You have funds on deposit with a relay, which is closer to the value that you want to be stored.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very credible model. And actually, I've heard a lot of people discussing this idea of running your own personal relay for certainty of backup. So maybe you'll have Raspberry Pi or Umbrel or something where you can install a relay. You only publish to your relay, but the kind of beefier relays subscribe to a bunch of personal relays. And if you want, you can do that. Or there's other people. Maybe you publish your stuff to a friend's relay, and maybe you don't worry about the cost, or maybe you do. So I think that idea you're proposing, I think, also makes sense. The more like media payment centric one, I think, is still one. I would suspect it will still happen because people are going to be comfortable with throwing sats around. It's just kind of like fun and easy and light, and we do it all the time today on Nostr. It's not on Damus, which happens to be Nostr, but it's very common to just throw sats around. It's like, oh, pay a Lightning invoice, welcome somebody new. Here's a couple. Here's 100 sats, and I think that culture is probably going to become a little bit closer to a part of the network. And in that case, I could see like the other day, I posted some video with Gian that we made a few weeks ago, and I posted on stacker.news. I think I got like 6,000 sats for it. I don't know, $1.25 in fiat. And it's like a lot of people just did that out of, kind of for fun, I guess, right? There's like a little tip. But I think I could imagine a future where there's something of a paywall, and I'm like, well, here's the the teaser content, and if you want the real one, just tap the sat giver thing, and it's 20 cents to unlock the rest of the video, or 20 cents to read the full blog post or something. And those types of paywalls we haven't really seen because it's too costly to set up, to enter your credit card and set up your subscription. And I think we haven't seen it because of the friction, but I think now that we have lowered friction and we're just playing and it's fun and we do it, I think it's natural that could graduate to like higher stakes, paywall type interfaces, which I think transforms the web.
So along those lines, one thing I did play with that was pretty cool was a WordPress plugin, and I think it was made by the folks who made Alby. And basically, you could just lock like part of a WordPress post. So like just like you said, you could have the beginning content and then a button, and then you click and pay, and you get the rest of the content. So I did play around with that, and I thought it was pretty cool. And I agree that's a viable model, and it's going to be a model because it's kind of straightforward and inevitable. Yep.
And so I think there's obviously a lot of activity today on the building on clients. I think there's not enough. I mean, there's a lot of exploration, but there can be 100 times more exploration on clients. And I think there's just, similarly so much that could be done to explore relays. So those to me feel like two of the big things. There might also be something of a middleware between clients and servers for things like maybe they live with the relays, but something like how should discovery work? Is that a service relay should provide? Is a service client should provide? Is it a third-party middleware thing that gets its own little sat bounty for the good work it does? So I wonder, as you're sort of looking at the whole space, are you looking at it as a builder or potential builder in the space? Or are you looking at it as just sort of like a hacker, project maintainer potential, or investor, or sort of where's your sort of perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of all of the above. I think the opportunities are kind of pretty vast in this space, and definitely all of those things are things that we're looking at. One of the most. Go ahead.
Is the bookmark.org team? There's a few people that are working together.
So bookmark.org is really an open source project. It was a hackathon project that was that we did last year. But I have my own company that I started last August called Payments Engineering. So essentially, we've just been donating resources to get this bookmark project off the ground in terms of the server resources and things like that. And, I did 90% of the code for that project just as a learning experience to kind of understand this whole ecosystem, which was awesome because, I was able to learn LN bits and all these different components of how to manage Lightning wallets, run LND and Lightning servers and all these things. So it was a great learning experience for me. And basically, at this point, I think we have volunteers that are coming to the project and want to contribute and do more. And so basically, I want to enable those volunteers to be able to do more. And if that, I think that might mean exploring some of these opportunities that have come up now with Nostr. And so we're looking at, coming up with a roadmap on exactly what that will look like. That's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, and is the charter of, you said it's called payment engineering?
Yeah.
Is that kind of like meant to be a holding company or incubator for a bunch of different
Something
ideas?
like that. Yeah, exactly. And, I think one of the big problems I see is kind of the regulated nature of the payments industry. And so if you're an open source developer and you want to build an application that interacts with people's money, depending which jurisdiction you're in, there can be all kinds of issues that you can run into. Yep. You might inadvertently be running an unlicensed money transmission service or something of the sort, right? And so one thing that I think would be great to do is provide a sort of safe, properly regulated sandbox for open source developers to be able to experiment with custodial money, custodial financial solutions, but without kind of all the red tape of going through the full process to become licensed to actually do so. And I know, like, in the Bitcoin world, they don't like to hear about this sort of thing, but like, I think as the market starts to mature, the rubber meets the road somewhere. And if you want to still be able to enable the kind of innovation that I think we need to be able to enable and allow developers to just jump in and play around, while at the same time respecting the fact that, if you're running a platform that's touching and moving people's money, that's a serious business, and it needs to be done seriously and properly. So I kind of see a space in the market where maybe there could be a provider of these kind of custodial services. And it's not just with money. It could also be with media, right? So we talked about personal relays, or where you want a place to have media hosted. So if we have a lot of people start operating their own relays, well, guess what happens? When things show up on your relay that you didn't want to be there, and there are certain processes and procedures to follow in those occasions. But if you're not used to operating as a web host at scale, you've probably never encountered those things before. And so I think there's a space in the market for a private company maybe to provide these kinds of services for the entire open source world. So that's one thing we're looking at with payments engineering is, maybe we can be that neutral provider of those things.
And I wonder if we were to think about, we talked about relays, you talked about media servers and media coupling to value transfer. That seems like a great early use case of the kind of thing you're talking about. Like, let me just put out a little bit of a hypothesis proposal. Like, if I wanted to share media in a more natively, let's say I wanted to share heavy media like a video in a more natively Nostr-centric way. I think Nostr is specifically, I think Fiat Jeff has said, like, it's really for text, and we're not trying to do kind of all of media, at least not right now. So if you take the most extreme example of video serving and you say, like, Nostr as maybe a kind of communication primitive to point to what's where, but then some other hypothetical thing should exist to be like the media server where that video is hosted for like the heavier content that presumably wouldn't be flowing through relays because they're going to be busy enough with their own stuff. Do you think that's a thing that should exist? Is that the kind of thing that you might consider building as application one, or what would be the trade-offs there in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at like the Nostr messages themselves, right, they're just text, they're just little JSON blobs, they're very simple. And so basically if you were going to serve video through Nostr, it's just a reference to a URL. And so then where is that video actually serving from? It's going to be a different place, and that needs to be that ecosystem needs to be developed. So I can definitely see us looking there.
What about discovery servers? Like, I think we haven't really seen what discovery should look like, and is discovery like a near-term opportunity that may not be a client service and may not be a relay specifically, but maybe kind of this middleware thing? Would that be an interesting place to look for this kind of thing?
I think so. So yeah, let's talk about search. Another middleware application after search that I want to talk to you about, and maybe it's related, is like filtering. Yeah. It's all kind of in this discovery space. So, we've both talked to that. The Nostr band guys, who's really building. I think what is the best search engine, or maybe only search engine so far. But it's pretty exciting to be there in the early days where you can actually kind of index the whole thing on a single machine.
The whole thing But so when I think about the that's Artur, and he's building Nostr.band, right?
Right.
Is the service, which is actually great, worth checking out. It's got a bunch of information for onboarding to Nostr and learning about it. It's got a great stats dashboard, and it has search, so you can kind of get a flavor of what's going on if you want to just search, for your favorite hobby. I don't know, alpine skiing or gardening or whatever. Maybe you can see if there's any notes written about those things. But I sort of think about search and discovery as they obviously have, a certain relationship to each other, but I think they also are very different in many ways. So search I think about as like you need to understand the global state of every note ever written by anyone to build the best search. I think it's in a sense you need global state, and one of the benefits of the way Nostr is constructed is it flexes the requirement that anybody really has global state. Like I think a lot of people, with value, with Bitcoin, with money, you need global state to ensure that there's no double spending. That's absolutely required. You can't just see a little part of your network. In Nostr, so everybody kind of tried to build like decentralized media on various blockchains, and obviously none of that stuff ever worked. But I think it's too high a threshold to say that we need global state to know which messages were sent to everybody, because it's like, some person on the other side of the planet, sends a message to somebody else on the other side of the planet that I'm never going to see in a language I don't even care about. Why is that? Why should I be required to have compute resources dedicated to understanding that? So I think the threshold on a publishing communication tool is much lower, in terms of understanding global state. But when you get to search, you require global state once again, because that person on the other side of the world talking to that other person may have said something relevant to the thing I'm searching for, right? Discovery, on the other hand, I think could be much more local, and so doesn't require global state, and could have, could benefit from more data, but doesn't necessarily need to know everything to be like the best. So I think about things like, could you help me, really simply, could you help me figure out all of the people that are on Nostr who I already follow on Twitter and help me find their public keys? Like, that's a very useful discovery-like utility without really, without the, requiring that threshold of global state. So I wonder sort of, even though they have coupling, is discovery an interesting area? And sort of, it seems like there could be dozens or hundreds of different ways to think about that, even just, where we are today. Is that, do you sort of agree with those kind of segmented definitions, and is one or the other more interesting to you?
I mean, I think they're both interesting. In terms of like the consistency across the network, I think that was kind of the idea, or the ethos from the beginning was like, hey, this is just going to be a little bit of a looser network. And so it's really up to the individual clients and relays to make the decision about how synchronized or not synchronized they want to be with the rest of the network. The issue right now is that there's no mechanism, and this gets back to the payments thing, is there's no mechanism by which a client can demand more, let's say, more consistent data or more global data, and then provide, like, basically pay for it, right? Because someone for that remote village where there's some message that you might not care about, if you, as the searcher on the other side of the world, actually do care about it, but you're the only one in the world that cares about it, is there a mechanism for you yourself to, input value into the system to to cause that media to be fetched on your behalf. And currently there's not. I think there's going to need to be some kinds of updates to the protocol that would enable those kinds of interactions. In
that direction, like have you posted any images or photos or GIFs or anything? There's a service called Nostr.build that I have been using as like a media uploader. I don't know if you've played around with that at all.
No, I haven't played with that.
So it touches on some of these themes, but in kind of a more near-term utility way that's kind of obviously useful.
Right.
And so if I want to post, like I posted a picture. I live in San Francisco and it has a beautiful sunset, and I posted a picture on of the sunset on Saturday. But to do it, I had to first upload the picture to Nostr.build, and then they gave me a URL. And then if I pasted that URL into Damus, then it would render it fine. You could imagine that a client like Damus or any client could end up having one or multiple media servers that it chooses as a default, or suggests, right, which gives the clients a lot of ability to influence which media servers get used, and if there's value and cost transmitted there, they might be able to direct their effort, by kind of serving that user experience, they get a lot of influence on what happens downstream from it, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think another way of saying that is that the clients are likely to monetize themselves by being customer acquisition vehicles for maybe middleware services or back-end services. So I think you're spot on, and you'll see different clients forming alliances with different kind of relays. My hope is that the network still stays interoperable, right? I mean, I think there's a very real risk of, a particular client and relays working together and creating kind of proprietary services that only work there, and it's only maybe partially interoperable with Nostr. I think there's a really kind of a big risk of developments like that occurring. So I hope that the network stays as open as it is. But yeah, those are my big concerns.
You were talking about the late 90s, so I'll just refresh for some people may not have been as active on the internet back then, but there were all these competing standards in browsers, and there were a lot of proprietary things in browsers, right, to make it, I think, like for IE to work more. Was it active server pages?
ActiveX,
ActiveX, right? Okay, right. ASPs were okay, but ActiveX was the kind of in-browser thing. Flash was another one of these. Different JavaScript standards over the years were a little bit more supported and not supported, and CSS. There were lots of things that kind of were little skirmishes in the battle to try to control the web.
And that was even with like almost everything still being like W3C standards and stuff, and there's still that much. Where with Nostr, it's even looser, I think, at the base of things. So beyond that really simple JSON format, like there's not a lot that must be in place, and so I think there's an even greater risk now of different parts
that leads
of the
to a
network.
greater risk?
I do.
I was guessing that would be more optimistic given the kind of looser couplings.
Well, because it's kind of like it's almost like the base message is so amorphous. It's almost like there's very little kind of shape to what that message may or may not contain. So there's more. It's like a canvas, right? There's more room for creativity in how the protocol is interpreted by various clients or relays. And so that's why I think it does increase the risk.
Right, I see. But I guess like if people like if clients and relays started building proprietary features that were really compelling that could not be opened up or interop in the same way, I could see it going the kind of history rhyming with kind of what we saw 20, 30 years ago. But I guess like the whole structure today, it feels like it's going to be this kind of brutal competition at every layer, which is usually good for consumers, good for it wouldn't surprise me if it's it's really hard for any given. I was hanging out with a friend of mine who was a long-term product manager at Facebook. I was telling him about Nostr, and he kept talking about like this client when it gets to 1 billion users, and I was like, I'm not sure that I'm not sure we're going to see history repeat that way. Like, maybe a good version of a social browser like Damus, maybe it can serve that many people, but maybe it's because it's so open source and uncontrolled. Maybe there's like an installation which becomes 100 million users, but maybe it actually looks a little bit more like an app store for social browsers where like, you can kind of turn on the features or turn off the features that you like or don't like within like an overall Damus distribution, but that Damus itself doesn't end up having, any type of real control over the protocol because the exit ability is so easy because it's all open source software. And, if you don't like what they're doing, you can flip the switches the way you like, and somebody switches them for you, and they just distribute a clone on the side that does it the way you want, kind of you being the collective community of people who want it some other way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now we have Damus. It's really the only somewhat polished client, because I think he's been working on it for like a year or something, so a pretty long time anyway. And there's still a long way to go on that client. But it's pretty much the only polished client. So it's just really too early to tell, because the thing we haven't even gotten into yet is like there's a lot more possibilities than just Twitter clones. Right.
Totally.
So, it's not going to be. There's not going to be one Nostr client that gets 1 billion users,
right?
And that's it, right? There may be one that gets to that level, but not without many others being alongside them. And if you go back to the interview that Jack did, I think with Fiat Jaff and JB55 and a few others, where he talked about this universe of like micro apps. So, I mean, I think that's really much more realistic in terms of where things will go, is a whole ecosystem of just very specialized micro apps, and then there's interoperability between them. The question becomes like when you have two different apps that are somewhat specialized, what does it even mean for them to be interoperable? Like if you had an Uber on Nostr and you also had a Twitter thing on Nostr, like what are we getting out of the fact that those are interoperable? So like one thing is identity, and I think there's a deeper conversation of identity to be having. But the other thing, like whatever else, is kind of like open to interpretation in terms of what that means. And so now take that ambiguity and multiply it times every different possible kind of app that might come out and how they all might work with each other, and it's we're kind of just like multiplying ambiguities on top of each other, and so it's really hard to predict how that would play out. Right.
Yeah, I wonder. Actually, I'm sure you haven't read it yet because I just hit publish on it like right before we hopped on here. But I just wrote a piece called "Is Nostr Just for Building Twitter Clones?" and I laid out a few hypotheses of interesting things that I think I'd like to see that maybe somebody's building. One of the things, as I've sort of was writing that and discussing and debating it with some friends, one of the things that I kept advocating for is the closer something is to a kind of purely digital experience that doesn't touch the real world, the more likely that it fits in this framework, and we see interoperability as a major feature. So you mentioned, does it matter if Twitter and Uber are operating on the same protocol? I'd say like today, roughly no, like kind of who cares? But the thing that I would value today is, if my wife is on her computer, she's okay with me contacting her on GChat. And if my wife is not on her computer and she's got her phone with her, she wants me to contact her on iMessage, and I have no idea where she is at any given time. How am I supposed to know that? I memean, which interface is correct, which messaging network I should be using to contact her. It's kind of, and she thinks it's like a reasonable, like, I don't know, how am I, I'm where I am, So an interoperable messaging network seems like I think we're not there, but it seems achievable because it's purely digital. And the interop there would actually be valuable because then you decouple the counterparties from needing to make the same selection. Maybe I like the interface of thing X and you like the interface of thing Y, and it has certain controls that let me control my notifs or bundle my messages from other experiences all into one. And I think that something like a GChat, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, iMessage, name your messenger. They all basically have roughly the same features, and but counterparties have to use the same clients to talk to each other. Whereas you'd hope that kind of, I think that's where interop will really shine early, and then interop on like Uber versus Lyft, like that's a much more complicated discussion. I think we're not going to be there until we have the purely digital experiences worked out first.
Yeah, so within like the same class of application, it would be nice if there's interoperability. I agree.
Yeah, and the more that it's purely messaging or kind of an internet native, text, video, whatever, like the more that it's just a fully digital experience, the easier it is to be early. You don't have, Uber has customer service and all kinds of logistics and real world money movement and stuff that is not going to happen overnight, whereas messaging can basically, roughly happen overnight. So I'm sort of more looking at, we graduate, I think we'll have purely digital experiences first. If we're going to have, actually I was talking to, have you met Max Webster yet, by the way? I
have not.
Okay, you should meet Max. He's great. He was on the call, the video that we published with Kian, which was like 2 weeks ago. He's a Bitcoin-only venture capitalist. So he meets everybody and knows kind of everybody building companies in the space. So that would be a good one for you to connect with. But he was pointing out that he thinks all marketplaces can eventually get moved to something like this. But we were sort of debating this on our live stream yesterday, like which ones will happen first. And I think that, purely digital, let's not call it marketplaces, just messaging. I think something like a marketplace that is that doesn't have like a real-time order book is maybe going to happen before something that does require a real-time order book. So I would think of Airbnb as mostly an asynchronous experience. Right, like you don't have a real-time order book, so you can kind of publish bids and asks and try to triangulate what is a reasonable price, and it's more messaging coordination, whereas the real-time nature of Uber makes it hard, I think. It feels more like an exchange, where you need an order book, who's available when and at what price, and like I need to make a decision right now. That, I think, creates more of a need for a centralized player, at least with today's technologies. I don't think we have a way to decentralize that effectively. Not to mention customer service, payments, et cetera, all the other, reputations and reviews. So I think we'll see sort of, let's say, iMessage first, then the marketplaces in a separate wave, and then the kind of real-time marketplaces in like a third wave. And maybe exchanges can happen earlier if like he was pointing this. Have you seen Nostr, I think it's called?
No.
It's I think it's, let's call it a real-time Bitcoin exchange. I think actually, I don't know if the goal is more around the KYC, non-KYC nature, or if it's doing local transactions or something. But it's a Bitcoin exchange that I think is meant to be built on Nostr. But I think the reason you might be able to do that kind of thing is the order books. You could actually work with multiple trusted third parties if you don't think you're getting a good deal. So you can actually maybe do real-time order book when you have other market signal that is not part of the core experience. So maybe real-time exchange could be done if you each pick your own trusted third parties and just come up with how you want to exchange there. But that's an interesting project worth looking at probably. I poked around but haven't gone deep on it.
I'll take a look.
Yeah, what else? Are there other kind of big categories of things that, kind of products or services or areas that you're looking at?
I mean, I think that's pretty good overview of it.
Yeah. Are you headed to Nostr in March?
I don't know. We'll see. I wasn't planning to travel to Costa Rica in March, but I may be unable to avoid it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, I think whenever you get people together, it's a good way to generate idea flow. So I think just having people all in the same place could be helpful. Are you in San Francisco, by the way?
I am not. I'm in North Carolina. I was in the
okay.
Bay Area for about 15 years, but left about 2 years ago.
Oh, okay, great. I figured, with some of your background and Patagonia, you look like you look like a native. But yeah, that's great. So, this has been a lot of fun. I'd love to kind of keep the conversation going, and if there's other kind of thoughts or ideas that you want to pull in or bounce around, let's do a jam session on any of it as you're sort of learning. These are all topics that I'm really passionate about, and just trying to sort of meet everybody and learn everything I can about it. And actually, Max, I mentioned, is another one who you should get connected with. So I can suggest that intro. I'll just share a link to this video, and he will say yes. Hopefully, I guess he would.
All right. Great.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.